Hello, dear students. Welcome to your course of Applied Linguistics, S5. So today's lesson, as you can see from the screen in here, deals with social and psychological factors in second language acquisition. Of course, we shall start with social factors, and then we'll move to the psychological factors in SLA, or second language acquisition. So, as you know, second language acquisition is a complex phenomena. The complexity of this phenomena is that many social and psychological factors are contributing in the development of the acquisition and the learning of a second language. So many researchers cannot help being victims of terminology. And many researchers state that the process of learning a second language is too complex, as there are many variables that contribute in the success or the failure of second language acquisition. So starting with the social factors in second language acquisition, we can say that we have we are to discuss some factors like attitudes and motivation, ethnic identity, frequency of contact with the target culture, sex variables, socioeconomic factors. So we'll try to focus just on these factors or variables and see the extent to which they contribute in the acquisition of a second language. So starting with attitudes as social byproduct. So attitudes and motivations are very important causal variables in SLA. It is maintained normally that positive attitudes towards a language and its native speaker are usually correlated with success in language learning. To what extent is this true? So the kind of attitude, positive or negative, developed by a learner is a byproduct that can be originally traced to a large set of social factors. So when dealing or when analyzing attitudes as a social factor contributing to second language acquisition, we need to take into consideration the teacher's attitudes, the peers' attitudes, and parents' attitudes. Okay? So the teacher's attitudes may influence the learning process of the student or of the learner. Peers' attitudes may influence positively or negatively the acquisition of a second language. And parents' attitude towards the language and towards its native speakers may also influence their children, related to the acquisition or to the learning of a second language or a foreign language. So starting with teachers' attitudes towards a second language, so it may influence directly or indirectly the learner's attitudes. So applied linguists are often found encouraging teachers to play a mediating role in bridging the gap between the learner's native culture and the target culture. Another factor in developing attitudes towards a second language is the role of peers. In a lot of researches, young people or adolescents are shown to be more affected by the peers' view of learning a second language than younger children. So the pressure of the peer groups to avoid using a second language is highly scored in many researches, which decreases the motivation to learn. What is more significant is the attitudinal atmosphere home. Parents have a great impact on their children concerning the acquisition or the learning of a new language, that is a second or a foreign language. So they have an effective role to play in enhancing their child's motivation to learn a second language and developing positive attitudes towards it. In this respect, Gardner 1968 shows that the role of parents is important in child's success in second language learning, and the attitudes of parents towards the second language and towards the second language community affect the child's attitude. So the child's attitudes are influential in motivating him to acquire the second language. So the role of attitudinal and motivational variables is recognized in almost all models of SLA or second language acquisition. In Krashen's monitor model, for instance, attitudes and motivations are very important in controlling the amount of input that can be taken in. They have indeed a filtering role, influencing the extent to which the second language material is successfully acquired or learned. What's the assumption in here? The assumption is that if the learner exhibits a favorable and a positive attitude towards the learning situation and towards the social group whose language he is learning, then he is expected to be more ready to make an extensive use of the available input. In a different vein, according to Schumann's acculturation model, attitudes and motivation represent one class of variables involved in acculturation. So for Schumann, the degree of success in SLA is determined by how well individuals acculturate to the second language group, and this model deals with individuals learning a language in a second language context. Moving to the second factor, that of SLA and ethnic identity, of course, the Warfighting hypothesis has sharpened the researchers' awareness of the link between language and the worldview of its speakers on the one hand, and the controlling role of the language in determining the kinds of knowledge on the other hand. What do I mean by that? We mean that the Warfighting hypothesis has influenced the field of second language acquisition to posit a correlation between second language learning and the almost that is inescapable adaptation of a second identity, which means that if you want to learn a second language, you should identify with the target language community, with the target language group, and you should adapt yourself to a new identity, okay? That is acknowledging the other's culture, okay, for them is essential to learn a new language. So the implication is that, then, for learners to achieve a high level of proficiency in a second language, they have to be able to think in a new way, to develop new behavioral tasks, habits, and tasks, to reduce their sense of language ego, and to be ready to share the patterns of the target language and to be able to share the feelings of its people. For some researchers, this is an important step to facilitate the acquisition of a second language or a foreign language. So for Lau and Schumann's acculturation model, language competence is developed in a parallel way with acculturation. So he defines then the social and psychological integration of the learner, okay, with the target language group is what we call acculturation. You acculturate, you adapt yourself to a new culture in order to learn a second language or a foreign language. So for Schumann, acculturation is includes or is defined as the social and the psychological integration of the learner with the target language group, which is, but to integrate with the target language group, there are certain stages according to Schumann. There are certain stages of acculturation that are as follows. For example, for him, the first stage of acculturation consists of an excitement on the part of the learner over the newest or the new things that he is facing in the new culture. So, like there is a sort of excitement at first. So an example of this, I can give you an example that of a student, for example, pursuing his studies abroad. So the first stage that you undergo once going abroad is the stage of excitement. You feel so excited, so stressed by this new culture, by new discoveries concerning this. So this is the first stage of acculturation. And of course, these stages have an influence on second language acquisition. Second stage is cultural shock, which is associated with feelings of the learner of anger, hostility, indecision, frustration, unhappiness, sadness, loneliness due to his being exposed to another culture. And then the intrusion of one or more cultural difference into his own image of the self. So the learner may even feel the homelessness in this second stage. And of course, this feeling may influence his learning of the language. He might at this stage feel neither bound firmly to one's native culture or fully adapted to the second culture. This feeling is what is usually referred to as like feeling of loneliness, which might be seen as an indicator of the third stage of acculturation. So, moving to the third stage of acculturation, it is the gradual and the first tentative and vacillating recovery. Like here, the learner is facing the third stage. Here, he faces a cultural stress. And here, there is a gradual acceptance of the differences, on the part of the learner who becomes more empathetic, or more empathic with the surroundings. Moving to the fourth stage of acculturation model, the learner accepts the new culture and develops self-confidence in the new person that he has developed in this culture. So all these stages of acculturation model might influence the learning or the acquisition of a second or a foreign language. Other researchers talk about integration and assimilation into the target language group as a social factor influencing language acquisition, like Berry 1980. So integration was defined as the identification within the other community while still retaining your values and your own heritage. While assimilation is the identification with the certain country while rejecting your own. Okay? So all these stages are very important in SLA. Now another factor, that of the frequency of contact with the target culture. So this is another factor or variable contributing to second language acquisition, and many researchers have been conducted in this domain to investigate the relation between the learner's levels of achievement and the previous experience in the target community. What do we mean by that? Many researchers did certain comparative studies, okay, between learners who have visited the target language community and learners who have never been there. So they assume that those who had the contact, a direct contact with the target language community, are more successful in learning a second or a foreign language than those who have never been to the target language community. Is this true? So the findings suggest that actual contact with the target culture helps the learners to adopt positive attitudes towards the language and increases the development of certain empathy, okay, towards the language itself that is being learned. Okay, that increases also, it increases the development, okay, of a certain ability to understand the other people's feelings, to appreciate their behavior, and to respond appropriately. So just to summarize this point concerning the frequency of contact of the target culture, it is generally assumed in literature that the more you get into contact, into a direct contact with the target language community, the more successful you will be. Okay? But those who do not have that opportunity to have a direct contact with the target culture are less successful. But the question is, can we say that this assumption is true in all cases? Of course, we cannot generalize. Because many people, because we may find certain exceptions of certain people who have never been abroad, yet they master a second language and a foreign language, and they master many languages. Okay? It's not an axiom in here, because you may find different exceptions, okay, and counter examples. So as I said, the counter examples are found, okay, and it's not always the case that whenever you have a higher level of achievement, okay, this higher achievement is just caused by being abroad or by being directly in contact with the native speakers. Of course, this is very important in learning a language. It's a plus. But it doesn't mean we cannot generalize this assumption. It doesn't mean that somebody who has never been abroad cannot master languages. Why? because there are many variables contributing to the acquisition of languages, not just one variable. Okay? So therefore, we can admit effectively that a previous experience in the target language culture or country and the frequency of contact, we can admit that the frequency of contact contributes a lot to the development of higher achievements in a foreign language. But it's not all. We cannot generalize because there are other variables, okay, that are intervening in here and that may influence language acquisition. And we may have different counterexamples as I have just explained. Moving to another factor, that of sex variable. When I say sex variable in here, it's the gender variable. Many people think that the fact of the female or that women are more successful in learning a second language or a foreign language than men. Many researchers tried to explain this phenomena, and it is generally believed among first language researchers that sex differences in terms of acquiring language, okay, really exists. So this criteria has incited researchers. So as we have said, that it is generally believed among first language researchers that sex variables or sex differences really exist in learning or in acquiring a language. So this criteria has incited researchers in the field of SLA to see the extent to which girls and boys vary in second language performance. So the findings, however, seem to be inconclusive. There are some findings which suggest that female learners have a higher level of achievement. This is what I have explained at first. A higher level of achievement, and other findings tend to support different assumptions in some cases, claiming that it is not so much a matter of sex differences, as much as it is a matter of socioeconomic differences. So you see in here, we have different researchers, okay, adopting different perspectives to explain the complex phenomena of second language acquisition and the different factors attributing to this learning. So this factor in here claims that there is a difference between men and women, okay, in terms of learning a language, and some people say that women are more successful in learning a second language than men. But is this axiomatic? Can we generalize this? No, we cannot generalize, because language depends on its speakers. Language varies through time and space. And in language, we have many variables that are contributing and intervening in the process of language acquisition. Okay? So that's why we cannot have conclusive results concerning this variable. Other researchers support the fact that differences in boys and girls' reading skills are attributable to motivational and environmental factors rather than to differences in ability. So each researcher, okay, discusses this complex SLA from different perspectives. Moving to socioeconomic factors. So here, another perspective of seeing things, of seeing second language acquisition or learning. So recent studies concerning socioeconomic factors, recent studies have brought into prominence the role of social class differences as a causal variable in SLA. It has been found that learners belonging to a high social class adopt more positive attitudes towards the target language and have higher scores in language tests than learners belonging to a lower class. Just to summarize this variable, these researchers claim that, for example, poor people or someone from a poor class may be less successful in acquiring a language than someone who is from a higher class. But, of course, that might be the case, but not always. Why? Because we cannot generalize. So, then, for some people, learners with parents of higher status, occupations, enjoy many opportunities to visit the target language community and to practice the language for pure or in pure authentic circumstances, for pure authentic communicative purposes. Why do we say that? They say that because, for example, rich people have that opportunity to visit different countries, to get directly in contact with native speakers because they are rich. So, and for them, this is an opportunity to get into contact, okay, because they afford traveling and they can get into contact with the native speakers directly, so automatically they will be successful in learning a second language. While poor learner, for example, a poor learner cannot afford traveling, cannot afford, financially speaking, the traveling, the trips to go abroad, and so on, to meet the native speakers. So for them, according to these researchers, for them, this learner cannot or is less successful than the rich one. Can we generalize? So the same thing, we can never generalize because we may have counterexamples, and we may have poor people who are really very fluent and competent in many languages than rich people. I'm not differentiating between the two, but I'm discussing the assumption. That is, the assumption may be true in some circumstances, but there may be some exceptions, okay, disconfirming this assumption. So this is it. So up to now and so far we have discussed the main or the major important social factors contributing in second language acquisition, namely attitudes and motivation, because attitudes influence the motivation of the learner, and we'll see motivation in the social factors as well. Ethnic identity, frequency of contact with the target culture, the sex or the gender variable, and the socioeconomic factors. All these social factors are very important in the acquisition of a second language. So now we shall move to the psychological factors influencing SLA. Thank you.